Deus Ex is a first-person shooter with RPG elements, or as some call it, an immersive sim. That statement feels a bit reductive, as the game also happens to be one of the greatest PC games ever made, at least in my opinion. It's hard to even start talking about it because of how important it was, and still kind of is. There's not many games that are made today that occupy the same sort of niche it does, and you'd be hard-pressed to find something made in the last 25 years that offers the same level of freedom this game does. To be clear, I'm not talking about the kind of freedom that comes out of, say, a traditional RPG. That sort of freedom extends to the storytelling, determining what you want your character to be in the context of the world. Deus Ex is different in that JC doesn't really change, at least outside of his pre-written character arc. What Deus Ex is offering is freedom in gameplay. There are so many options available to you, it's kinda psychotic. Granted, the game is a quarter-century old at this point, so it might not seem like there's as many options as I'm hyping up, but back then the story and gameplay were pretty much unparalleled. I'm starting to get ahead of myself, so let's go ahead and get started with the visuals. So getting it out of the way, most people would agree that the game's graphics have aged the worst. I'm usually an apologist for games that look like this, stuff like Halo and Thief, but unfortunately I tend to agree that the game's weakness lies in its visuals. The characters themselves are probably the most obvious example of this, as many you interact with have a very early 3D games look to them. There is variety in their designs, which is nice, so it didn't feel too repetitive, but facial animations are limited to the basic move the jaw up and down maneuver. It's more than Thief and Perfect Dark had, but it's still dated. The main character animations are charming, but suffer from similar problems in that they are fairly limited in their complexity and range. What I mean by that is, there's not a lot of animations, and they're pretty basic. In order to get the most out of this dead horse I'm beating, let's look at Perfect Dark, Thief, and Halo again. These games are also about 25 to 30 years old, but their animations are more varied, have more energy to them, and feel less robotic. And yeah, they have their own shortcomings, like how in Thief you can see where the animation loops over, or how Perfect Dark tries to do hand animations with a clenched fist. But in my opinion, Deus Ex falls behind in this department. Widening the scope, the environments aren't flawless either, but they have far fewer issues. They can feel a bit barren, but I only ever got that feeling on some of the larger maps like downtown New York or Paris. The actual architecture of the levels is much more interesting to talk about, but I'll save it for the gameplay section as it'll be more relevant then. That said, there are some areas that are genuinely amazing to look at. Some of these spots will live in my mind forever, even if they are technically simple. And I know I was saying the characters are dated, but I think JC's design is perfect because he looks exactly what he sounds like.
You mechs might have copper wiring to reroute your fear of pain, but I've got nerves of steel.
The voice acting in this game is notorious, for better or worse. JC in particular is a favorite of mine. He probably has the most deadpan vocal performance I've heard in a game protagonist. JC, of course, standing for Jesus Christ. That's real, by the way. War Inspector's gone on record about it. Anyway, he's serious sounding, but brings some dark humor to some otherwise serious moments. Everyone has heard the "what a shame" bit, but that's just one of a few examples. I love J. Anthony Frank's performance, but I get that it might put some people off. Of course, not all of the voice acting can be as cool and awesome as JC's. Most of the voice acting is alright starting out, maybe a bit hammy at parts depending on what characters you talk to, or a lot hammy, but about the same level as Thief. Then you make it to Paris.
0001 stupid buzzword. That door should be locked.
Now listen, I understand that the devs had like 12 guys to voice act, some of which were the devs themselves, but well, I've heard more convincing accents. It can be especially obvious when you hear someone's real accent slip through and you realize it's someone you've heard before. I don't mind it that much, but the voice acting outside of the American levels might put even more people off than JC's voice did.
Mr. J.C. Denton, in the fresh.
One thing that's also hard to ignore is the music, because it's really, really, really good. It's easily in my top 5 best game OSTs, and I'm sure you've heard it somewhere. It was done by these guys, but mostly these two fellas. They use trackers to make the music, and if you haven't seen Ahoy's video on it, a tracker is basically a piece of software that composes music in real time given notes, note parameters, and samples. With these pieces, the game will run back this tracker in real time, which allows the music to sound nice and clear, but also not take up the majority of the game files. Given that most of these guys started in the Amiga/PC tracker scene, it makes sense that they would use what they're good at. And man, is this music good. It's exciting, ambient, synthy, has variety, and very importantly, is dynamic. It'll change depending on things like if you're in combat, if you're talking to someone, if you're taking a stroll across town, or if you've decided to end it all, punch your ticket, X yourself out, ghost yourself, blank yourself, crash out, blow it off. Going back to the variety in the tracks, most of them are electronica at heart, which given that everything was made in a tracker isn't surprising. That said, there's still some nice juxtaposition here, and not everything sounds like rave music. Going through areas like the canal in Hong Kong, and hanging out at UNATCO, the music takes on this quiet, almost reflective quality at times. It brings a neo-noir atmosphere to the locations you visit, which helps to offset some of that visual emptiness I mentioned earlier. That said, when the game wants to kick it up, it kicks it up hard. I could listen to this stuff all day, but we have places to be. Of course, a lot of these places are areas we don't have access to, and there's multiple ways to get around that fact. Most of what you do will be dictated by what kind of playstyle you're looking for. Do you want to be an unstoppable commando, or sneak by everyone without being detected, or go for a non-lethal run? There's a few systems that will support how you want to go about things, and they offer a lot of options. Starting out, you'll have access to a basic skill system that operates on points. You'll start out with 5,000, but if you unassign points to pistols before the game starts, it'll upgrade your pistol skill for free, and you get some points out of it. Don't spend it all in one place, or on swimming. Most of these skills are self-explanatory, and it is viable to put points into all of them, except swimming. However, I'd recommend picking a skill or two that sounds fun, and building everything else around that, except swimming. Look, in case you're still considering swimming, even on stealth playthroughs I only needed a higher than untrained swimming skill, like, twice. You've been warned, waste your points at your own peril. You'll get points as you progress through the game, usually by completing goals, or more often than not by exploring around. Going for an all-rounder build will let you experience most of the game without any issue, but the real fun is in becoming a specialist. For example, dump your points into heavy and become a walking tank, or stealth it up and go with lockpicking, electronics, and hacking. There's plenty of options, but regardless of what you pick, I'd recommend putting at least one level into hacking, unless you're willing to go digging for passwords. Whatever you decide to pick, there's no shortage of supplies to be found for any one build, so don't worry about being limited by having no ammo or something. Except for the GEP gun, I'd recommend having a backup weapon for that. Of course, rockets aren't that hard to come by either, so what do I know? The other major factor to consider when building up your JC is what AUGs you want to use. Augmentations, or AUGs, are found as you play the game. Some of these will be handed to you on a silver platter, but you'll have to poke around and find codes and such to get the rest of them. There are duplicate AUGs, so don't worry too much about missing one. Essentially, AUGs are abilities that you can activate to enhance yourself in certain ways. For example, you can make yourself move completely silently, or enhance your aim with a built-in camera, or install an explosive deterrent field. You have 9 total slots to fill through the course of the game, but there are 18 total AUG types that can be found. You'll have to choose what AUG you want to occupy in any particular slot. These canisters hold 2 different augmentations to pick from, and if you find a medbot, you can fill the slot with an augmentation. These will be permanent additions, so I'd read what they do carefully before you pick one. In addition to your skills and augmentations, you'll have a few tools at your disposal. And by tools, well, let's just say, a rocket launcher that shoots white phosphorus. There's a few weapons in the game, and most of them are pretty good. I can't say I'm a fan of the stealth pistol, and the crossbow takes 300 years to be any good. I usually default to using a sniper rifle, but there's also some automatics and shotguns out there. Every weapon falls into the 5 different weapon skill categories, so whatever you dump points into, you'll have plenty of options. You'll also run into quite a few weapon upgrades, which improve any gun stats and even add things to it, like a silencer or a laser dot. A few of the weapons also come with different ammo types, which spices things up a bit. Some weapons are a little tooth powerful, like the Dragon Tooth Sword, which is a nanite blade able to split atoms. It kills basically anything in one hit, even with little low-tech weapons training. It's fun for ninja builds, but it kinda makes all the other melee weapons obsolete. Of course, that's assuming you're doing a lethal run. There's plenty of choices open to someone who wants to keep their conscience clear, or someone who just wants the challenge. The riot prod and the police baton offer reliable ways to knock someone out, and it's really easy to get right up to someone to use them. The enemies don't actually have any contact detection, so you can just press up against them and give them the Garrett special. The prod takes ammo, which isn't always easy to find, but it helps keep enemies from running off and getting help. The actual combat itself can vary in quality. You won't have much in the way of skills or abilities starting out, so guns and blades are a bit of a hassle to use. It feels like the game wants you to be stealthy starting out, which is fine by me, but might be a bit disappointing to some. The first mission, Liberty Island, has a bit of a reputation for being a slow start to the game. For someone who always plays as a stealth archer, it's not a huge problem since it's very stealth oriented, but it can be a pain for anyone who wants to do something not stealthy. Once you get off the island though, the game starts to pick up. My only big complaint is that the gunplay never really feels great, even by the end of the game. I think it's just because of how enemies react to gunshots. Your bullets feel a little inconsequential until the guy you're shooting keels over. At higher levels though, gunfights, and fights in general, are usually over before they begin, so it more or less evens out. The other major part of the game, and the larger scope of the levels, are completing objectives. The goals you get, both primary and secondary, are deliberately kept vague because there are multiple ways to achieve them. For example, this goal wants me to find a secret generator. You could check every building to see which one likely contains it, or you could ask around and see if anyone knows anything. Once you do find it, you can try to pick the doors, or you can try to find a key nearby. You could also ask around some more and see if anyone knows how to get in. Or you could just blow up the doors and get in that way. The game is full of examples like this, with multiple routes to complete most objectives. It constantly rewards you for trying new paths, and even just looking around can reward you with things like extra ammo, all the way up to secret caches full of weapons and upgrades. I never got the sense that I couldn't do a goal or see some cool area because I was locked out of it for having the wrong augmentations and skills. On top of all of that, exploring around will open up new narrative interactions, some of which can have major implications for the story. The story itself might be my favorite part of the game. There's a lot to take in, and with plenty of reading and talking to people, the world will slowly unravel itself to you. By looking around and paying attention, you can piece together a lot of how the world works in this setting. Some things aren't entirely explained, like how the US trimmed down its waistline, but this whisper of doubt really sells the dystopian setting. The majority of the story is pretty clear, but some of it is told through metaphors and books you read throughout the levels. Of course, given that the game is a conspiracy simulator, a good chunk of character motivations are wrapped up in lies and deceit. You're never certain if anyone you talk to can be trusted, and if you poke around enough, you'll find plenty of reasons not to trust. Outside of reading and, talking to people, some of the story is told through your info link. As a gameplay point, you'll get objective updates and hints as to what you should be doing through it, but it becomes more relevant as the story progresses. And boy does the story progress. I don't want to spoil it because I think it's one of the game's biggest strengths, and there's a lot of fun to be had in figuring it all out yourself. I'll leave you with a little taste, however. Basically, the story can be summarized as, what if 9/11 really did happen? Essentially, it's every conspiracy mashed into one game. If you enjoy the X-Files and reading about Ruby Ridge, then this story is for you. Remember, the government always has your best interests at heart. Do not let so-called freedom fighters dissuade you from the truth. That to serve our majestic leaders is to truly be free. Where was I? Oh yeah, 9/11. The game starts off simple. You join up with UNATCO following your brother Paul's footsteps, UNATCO being the United Nations Anti-Terror Coalition. After the thankfully fictitious terrorist attack on the Twin Towers, as well as the real one on the Statue of Liberty, UNATCO was formed and became the world police. Naturally, the US wanted a piece of the action, and so UNATCO's headquarters are located on Liberty Island. The further you go along with the company, the more things get tangled, and motivations become murky. You'll spend much of your time early on getting to know the people at UNATCO and carrying out your duties. As you get further entrenched, things happen behind the scenes that have massive ramifications for the world, and you can't escape getting caught in the middle of it. As your role becomes more and more important, you'll end up traveling the globe in search of answers, with enemies hidden everywhere. Of course, not every enemy is that well hidden.
Anybody else hear something?
In the walls.
Say hi to your mother for me.
Who the hell?
Oh my god. There's a lot to see on your adventures, and not all of it will make sense at the time. But if you're at least a little bit observant, there's plenty to find in the shadows of society. Just remember that when you start at UNATCO, loyalty pays. Being a turncoat doesn't. I can't recommend this game enough. It's a pioneer title, and a lot of people have it on their top games of all time lists for a reason. It rewards players for not only experimenting, but for replaying the game as well. The music is phenomenal, the writing is thoughtful, the gameplay is usually satisfying, and it looks well, maybe not incredible, but I like it. Given that it's routinely less than $1, there's very little reason not to try it. If the graphics put you off that bad, get the Deus Ex Revision mod. Thanks for watching, until next time.